Before I continue my series on the Mystery Case Files games, I want to mention that when I talk about any games in this Ravenhearst storyline, I am going to end up more than likely revealing spoilers from previous games. So basically, whenever a game has the title, has the word Ravenhearst or Fate in it, it's all part of the same connected storyline, so it's a little difficult to talk about the specific game without mentioning the games that come before it. So, just as a forewarning to all of you, spoilers to previous games will likely pop up as we continue. After the events of Madame Fate, the Master Detective, you, returns to Ravenhearst Manor. Once you return, the spirit of Emma, the spirit that you helped free from the house in Ravenhearst, comes back to let you know that there are 3 more spirits trapped in Ravenhearst Manor. Her maid, Rose, and Rose's twin daughters, Charlotte and Gwendolyn. Your job is to explore the house, and specifically the secret underground town where Charles held these 3 individuals, in an attempt to free their spirits, and also to stop Victor, Charles's son, from bringing Charles back to life. This is the first Mystery Case Files games that doesn't focus quite as much on the hidden object scenes. There are still hidden object scenes, and they're still visually interesting, but this is the first game that really focuses more on the story, which is something that I appreciate. This is also the first game with live actors in it. The previous games, up to Madame Fate, really just had Emma talking to you throughout the entire game, and Justin Ravenhearst, the first 2 didn't have any voice acting at all. Madame Fate pretty much just had Madame Fate, but in both of these cases, these were just voiceover roles. The actors themselves didn't really appear, at least not in person. This particular game actually had 5 actors. We have Rose, Charlotte, Gwendolyn, Victor, Charles, oopsie-doopsie, I miscounted, and Emma, which apparently I didn't count when I wrote this script, so there were actually 6 actors, but regardless, all of them do a good job. Special shout out should go to the actor who played Victor, because he does the crazy old man routine just really well. He puts 110% into this part that's not that big, and he just does a phenomenal job. But again, all of them do a really good job, and at the end of the game there's some behind-the-scenes videos that play, and it makes it very obvious that all these guys had a lot of fun with this, which is just really nice to see. And finally, when it comes to positive things about this game, this is really the first game where I feel like the creators knew what they were doing with this series. Up to this point, the previous games kind of felt like experiments. Like the creators were trying to just figure out what they wanted to do with the Mystery Case Files series. And to me, this game really solidified what this series was going to be and helped kind of set the road work for future games. Now, all that being said, with the positives, there are, of course, still some negative things to include. This particular game has a single piece of music that kind of plays on a loop throughout the entire game. Now, this isn't necessarily inherently bad, but it does go from just kind of vaguely unsettling to just really dramatically intense. And the music doesn't care where you are in the game before it becomes intense, because it's on a loop, and it will go on the loop regardless of where you are. So I had quite a few moments where I would just be kind of staring at the screen looking for a button, and the music would get really, really intense, where there was really nothing happening. And while this isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, it does kind of take me out of the moment and messes up the atmosphere a little bit when it's just being really intense when there's really nothing happening on screen. Another thing is just a specific moment when it comes to pacing. So throughout most of the earlier games, and this is something that also came back in the later games, the Master Detective writes things down in a journal. Usually it's just the things that have happened up to this point, so every now and then a new page will be written, and it's basically just the Master Detective writing down what just happened. But occasionally there are things that are written down that end up being like solutions for puzzles later. And there's a moment in the game where you come across a phone, and next to this phone are a series of numbers. Now, for anyone who has done a puzzle game, you might guess that these series of numbers will end up not being the one that you need to dial, and that is certainly correct. Nevertheless, the Master Detective decides to write every single one of these numbers down in their journal, despite the fact that the numbers are right there next to the phone, and so you really don't need to write them down to remember them. Later in the game, we come across a poster that was being used to cover up an escape route that the twins were trying to dig up, a la Shawshank Redemption. On the back of this poster was a phone number. However, this one, the Master Detective decides not to write down. And not just that, they pretty much just completely dismiss it as unimportant. Now, this number, of course, is the one that we end up needing for the phone, which means that you either have to write it down yourself, or you have to remember it as you go from where this poster is all the way back to where the phone was. And this is just kind of, like, frustrating and ultimately needless backtracking that you shouldn't need to do. Hence, why I said it was needless. The last thing I want to address is just a single puzzle that I just really do not like. It's basically one of those, memory matching things, like you have the tiles and you have to click on two of the matching ones, and once you flip them, they disappear. It's that kind of thing. But it's timed, which to me is already annoying enough because I don't like being timed, as I have discussed in this very series before. But on top of that, every few seconds, the whole puzzle rotates. So not only am I timed, I have to remember where things are well enough to also know where they go when it rotates. And it just gets really frustrating and really overwhelming, and I don't think I have ever gone a playthrough without skipping this particular puzzle, and I have played through this game quite a few times. Ultimately, although I do feel like I spent a fair amount of time on negatives, it's mostly just because it takes a lot of explaining, like kind of a background thing, to get into what is ultimately pretty small, nitpicky things. And I don't think any of these nitpicky things ultimately take away from the fact that, honestly, this is a very fun and very enjoyable game. One that I would ultimately give a 7 out of 10. So thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you tomorrow.